You know what's strange? We've all met that person, the one who saves thousands of dollars seemingly effortlessly while you're white-knuckling your way through another failed budget, feeling like you're sacrificing everything just to put away $200 a month. They're not making dramatically more money than you. They're not eating rice and beans in a dark basement, and yet they hit savings milestones that seem impossible while you're still arguing with yourself about whether you can afford guacamole at Chipotle. Here's what nobody tells you. These people aren't more disciplined than you. They're not gritting their teeth through constant sacrifice. In fact, they barely think about saving at all anymore. And that's exactly what makes them so effective. Picture this. It's Sunday evening and you're meal prepping for the week, but you're miserable. You're chopping vegetables you don't even like because some finance guru told you meal prep saves money. You're thinking about all the restaurants you're avoiding, all the experiences you're missing, all the fun everyone else is having while you're stuck playing the role of financially responsible adult. This is deprivation, and psychologically it's completely unsustainable. Now picture someone else. They're also saving aggressively, maybe even more than you, but they're genuinely enjoying their homemade dinner because they actually learned to cook food they love. They're not thinking about what they're missing. They're not counting down days until they can live again. They've built a life they genuinely enjoy that just happens to cost less. The difference isn't willpower, it's psychology. And once you understand how their brains work differently, everything about saving money starts to make sense. Researchers in behavioral economics have identified something fascinating. People who save money quickly without feeling deprived have fundamentally rewired what psychologists call their reward pathways. Most people get dopamine hits from spending money, new shoes, restaurant meals, impulse purchases at Target. But fast savers? They've managed to transfer that same neurochemical reward to watching their bank balance grow. This sounds impossible, but here's what's actually happening in their brains. They've created what behavioral scientists call competing rewards. When you only have one source of pleasure, you'll always choose it. But when you have two equally satisfying options and one costs nothing, the choice becomes obvious. The person who feels deprived only has spending as their reward. The person who saves effortlessly has built multiple reward sources, most of which don't require money. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't something you're born with. It's something that gets constructed, often accidentally, through a specific psychological process. Think about people who grew up with very little money, but somehow didn't internalize scarcity as deprivation. Maybe their family was broke, but their parents turned free activities into adventures. The library wasn't a punishment, it was where you discovered entire worlds. Walking instead of driving wasn't sacrifice, it was when you had your best conversations. These people learned early that satisfaction doesn't require spending, and that psychological framework stayed with them. Or consider someone who traveled through Southeast Asia on $30 a day and had the time of their life. They returned home and suddenly their $200 restaurant habit felt absurd, not because they were being disciplined, but because their reference point had permanently shifted. They'd experienced proof that money and joy aren't directly correlated. This is the crucial difference. Deprivation requires constant resistance against what you want, but these fast savers have actually changed what they want, and that transformation happens through a specific psychological sequence. It starts with what researchers call intentional attention shifting. Most people unconsciously notice everything they can't have when they're trying to save. Every commercial, every friend's vacation photo, every new car in the parking lot becomes a reminder of what they're sacrificing. But fast savers have trained themselves to notice different things entirely. They've become fascinated by efficiency, not in a depressing, penny-pinching way, but genuinely intrigued by optimization. They get the same satisfaction from figuring out how to cut their grocery bill by 30% that other people get from buying something new. The achievement itself becomes the reward. There's also something fascinating about how they handle what psychologists call hedonic adaptation. This is the well-documented phenomenon where humans quickly get used to pleasure and need increasing amounts to maintain the same satisfaction. You buy a new phone and you're thrilled for 3 days, then it's just your phone. Fast savers understand this instinctively. They realize that the $6 coffee gives them about 4 minutes of pleasure, then it's gone. But the $6 added to savings gives them a small satisfaction that actually compounds. Every time they check their bank account, they get a tiny dopamine hit. That's hundreds of micro rewards versus one fleeting pleasure. The math isn't even close. But let's address the elephant in the room. Some people reading this are thinking, this sounds like making excuses for not enjoying life. And here's where the psychology gets really interesting. The people who save fast without deprivation have discovered something consumer culture desperately doesn't want you to know. Anticipation often provides more pleasure than consumption. Studies in neuroscience consistently show that your brain releases more dopamine while anticipating a reward than while experiencing it. These savers have essentially hacked this system. They're not giving up the vacation, they're extending the pleasure of the vacation across 6 months of anticipation and planning. They're not avoiding the new car, they're enjoying the fantasy of which car they'll buy for months while their down payment fund grows. By the time they actually make the purchase, they've already extracted far more joy from the goal than the thing itself will ever provide. There's also a paradox at the core of how these people think about money. They simultaneously believe money matters tremendously and doesn't matter at all. Money matters because it represents freedom, options, security. But money doesn't matter because they've proven to themselves they can be happy regardless of how much they spend. This is completely different from someone who's constantly fighting the urge to spend. That person believes deep down that spending money will make them happy, so every act of saving feels like choosing sadness. The fast saver knows from experience that spending beyond basics has diminishing returns on happiness, so saving doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like choosing future freedom over present excess. Here's something that might blow your mind. These people often have what seems like an unhealthy relationship with spending, but it's actually the opposite. When they do spend money, they extract maximum value because it's intentional. They're not mindlessly buying coffee because it's Tuesday and that's what Tuesdays look like. When they buy the coffee, it's because they genuinely want it in that specific moment, and that intentionality makes the experience richer. Meanwhile, the person who feels deprived is often spending constantly but enjoying it minimally because it's all unconscious habit. Spending doesn't feel good anymore, it just feels normal. Not spending feels like punishment. The psychological shift that enables fast saving without deprivation also involves redefining what treating yourself actually means. Most people think treating yourself requires spending money. Fast savers have expanded that definition dramatically. Treating yourself might mean sleeping in on Saturday, taking a long bath, finishing a book in one sitting, going for a night walk, having an uninterrupted phone call with someone you love. None of these cost anything, but all of them provide genuine pleasure if you're psychologically available to receive it. This is where most people get stuck. They're so conditioned to associate pleasure with purchase that free joys barely register. It's not that the free things aren't satisfying, it's that they haven't trained their attention to notice the satisfaction. Fast savers have developed what psychologists call savoring skills, the ability to fully experience positive moments regardless of their cost. When they eat a homemade meal, they're actually tasting it, not thinking about the restaurant they're avoiding. When they're walking instead of driving, they're noticing their surroundings, not calculating the money saved on gas. There's also a profound identity component that most people miss entirely. The person who feels deprived while saving identifies as someone who's temporarily restricting themselves. "I'm on a budget" carries the same psychological weight as "I'm on a diet." It's temporary suffering until you can return to normal. But fast savers don't identify as people on a budget. They identify as people who figured out how to build the life they want efficiently. It's not restriction, it's optimization. And that identity shift changes everything. When saving is part of your identity rather than a temporary behavior, you stop negotiating with yourself constantly. You don't debate whether you can afford something because affordability isn't determined by what's in your account. It's determined by whether the purchase aligns with someone who values financial freedom. The beautiful thing about this psychological framework is that it actually gets easier over time. The first month of intentional saving might require some adjustment, but by month 6, your brain has literally rewired its reward systems. Watching your savings grow provides genuine pleasure. Finding creative free alternatives feels like winning a game, and the things you used to think were essential barely cross your mind. So, here's the truth. People who save money fast without feeling deprived aren't superhuman. They haven't discovered some secret financial loophole. They've simply built a life where saving is the path of least resistance because they've aligned their psychology with their goals instead of constantly fighting against themselves. And that's not a skill you're born with. It's an identity you build,
one intentional choice at a time, until the person who saves effortlessly isn't someone you're trying to become, it's just who you are.